All right. So everybody, I'm Emma and I'm here at Jenna, and tonight we're going to talk about digitization projects. And this is more of kind of from a project management stance, less about how to actually scan items, because you just have to learn how to use your scanner to do that. And she'll kind of talk more about scope in a second. But like I said, guys, we have had almost like 340 people sign up for this. So if you'll go ahead and mute, so if you'll just mute your microphone, that'd be really helpful. We could just have a lot of things happening in the background. We are recording this, and I will place it on our YouTube channel later this week, but I will send out a recording to everybody who registered. So if you miss something or you don't see, like some text, you'll get the recording later this week. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. And in order to do the Q&A, just so we'll finish the webinar, we're going to talk about upcoming webinars, and then we'll do the Q&A. And in order to ask a question, just go ahead and unmute at that time. So we'll just hold off to the end. And really quickly, this is my shameless plug. Backlog is my company, and we sponsor archival and genealogy research webinars. We do about 2 a month. So we are an archival consulting and genealogy research firm. We do archival needs assessments. We work on digitization plans, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. We do genealogy research as well. We tackle a lot of brick walls. So if you can't connect to the next generation, or you have that one elusive ancestor, that's something that we can really help you out with. And then also lineage society applications. If you're trying to get into the DAR, the documentation around that can be a lot to find. And then we also do family history services. And with that, we've been doing a lot of oral history interviews. We've created some family history books, things like that. All right. And then very quickly, I'm Emma. I'm hosting the webinar, but Jenna will give it. I founded Backlog in 2001 after being laid off. Before that, I was a university archivist for 5 years. And before that, I worked in history and genealogy reference in a library here in St. Louis. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jenna and her cat, Ellie.
Hi, I'm Jenna. So I am a museum archivist now, but I used to be a university archivist when I was solo. So I had to learn how to do everything. And so I am trying to disseminate some of the things I've learned, mistakes I've made, things like that. And so this presentation was inspired by a presentation I co-presented a few years ago locally, and because I'm in New England. So I want to share a little bit about the planning that goes into a digitization project. Next slide, please. So I really want to talk about the foundational questions for planning a digitization project. You have to design and manage a project in order for it to be successful. Every project's technical requirements and goals will be different, but I plan today to walk you through the decisions that you'll have to make to design a successful project with results that will endure into the future. So we're going to talk about, like I said, those foundational questions, some practical considerations around technology and outputs, your basic technical requirements. So like, what are the basic preservation standards for your digital files, the metadata that you'll create to describe and document the digital materials, and the ongoing digital preservation and security, because no digitization project is really one and done. Next slide, please. So before you turn your scanner on, think about what is your project? What is it that you want to digitize? Why this project and why these materials? Who are your audiences, and how will this project serve them? What impact is this going to have? Are you trying to improve community genealogy? Are you trying to digitize materials that are being used by PhD researchers? Perhaps architectural plans for historical architects, environmental historians. Maybe you're digitizing field notebooks from botanists from the 1800s or something like that. Or maybe artists are using your collection for inspiration. So think about why you are digitizing the things that you are digitizing and who might be using them. And of course, there's no crystal ball. You might not know exactly what uses are going to happen. and there will certainly be some serendipitous uses that you don't expect, but it's really a wasted effort if you're just digitizing things, putting them online, or you don't know where they're going to go. You're just scanning them and they're sitting on a hard drive that no one can access. So thinking about these questions from the beginning helps you to really coordinate your efforts and make the most effective use of your time. And we'll get much more into this question, but what resources are you going to need? So that can be a really big question. Resources means a lot of different things. But start thinking about, okay, what am I going to need for technology? What skills are going to be necessary? How much money is this going to cost? Things like that. When you're thinking about your resources, scale your project to the resources that you know that you have or that you can get. If you know that you have a deadline, like say an upcoming anniversary, or a centennial or something, a grant period or a semester intern, design a project that's accomplishable within whatever those parameters and limits that you have. Next slide, please. So as I've kind of been getting at, the digitization needs to have a purpose. So when you're starting out, prioritize your projects based on, I like to say two things: the physical vulnerability of materials and the demand for them. So you might have, let's say a bunch of materials that are used quite often and they're handled a lot, and you want to reduce the mechanical wear and tear. Or perhaps there are materials that are on thermal paper from like old faxes, but and that's just going to continue to deteriorate until the whole image and all the text is gone. So you want to capture it now. So I think those are two things to think about when you're deciding what it is that you're going to be focusing on for your project. And when you're thinking about, oh, okay, this is something that's really in high demand, in order to get to that, use your reference statistics and your knowledge of your collections and your community to really envision what type of digitization project will have the most impact if digitized. Think about how you want to see the collection used, or what research or community activity you want to support. And then once you've decided what materials you want to digitize, start planning the resources that you're going to need. Next slide, please. So in planning a project, we talk about the three-legged stool of digital preservation. And so there are existing graphics for this that are actually based on digital preservation, but they were not good images. So here's a three-legged stool patent that's historical. So when you think about a three-legged stool, all the legs need to be the same length or it's going to tip over. And you have to have all three legs or it's going to tip over. So think about these three prongs that are going to support your project: the organization, which is the people, your policies, your infrastructure, the technology that you have, and money, or any financial resources or other types of resources that you have. And this model actually works for a lot of projects. It doesn't have to just be digitization. Consider your infrastructure, what types of tech that you have, and your financial resources whenever you're starting any kind of project. Maybe it's just a processing project. Maybe it's a conservation project. Maybe you're cleaning your house, or planning a move. Like this is a really good model for thinking about the things that you need to move forward. Next slide, please. So the organization is the individual people and the people of the organization as a whole. So who's going to be doing this work? What skills do they have? What skills do they need? Are they going to be digitizing and writing a finding aid? Do they know how to write a finding aid? Have they used this type of equipment before? Do they need to learn about metadata? How will this project fit in with their other responsibilities if they have them? If you are trying to add a project onto someone's plate without taking something away, that's not good. That's not really planning for anything other than burnout. And how do your infrastructure and policy support this project? Do you have a good volunteer infrastructure, a good intern infrastructure? Do you have grant writers to help you get money for to run a project like this? Just think about how your institution works. And every institution has different assets and skills on staff that may not even be related to the archives, but that can help accomplish the project. And when you're thinking about the skills that someone needs, consider what skills your institution is going to need in-house after the digitization is done. Will you need someone to update software and make sure that the scanners and digitization equipment are talking to your computers? You're going to need to migrate file formats every few years, possibly. Are there going to be people on staff who have the skills to handle the digital preservation? Next slide, please. So technology is both your equipment needs and your software needs. You don't necessarily need all the digitization equipment in-house. You can contract a vendor to do this work or partner with an organization that has equipment that you don't, and that can cut some costs. Maybe you develop a collaborative within your community to buy and use one another's equipment. That will increase your financial effectiveness and also build community. So maybe you don't really want to buy all the equipment for digitizing audio. That's actually something that I'm planning for next year. Or you have reel-to-reel audio or video or DAT tapes or other types of obsolete media where you're not going to get any more of it and you just want to get it digitized. So maybe you just go with a vendor for that. Something like a basic photo scanner, something you're just going to continue to use. But maybe you need a document camera or a DSLR camera. And what software do you need to edit whatever the products of your digitization project are? And the software that you need for that comes with the equipment, like the scanning software, say, as well as photo editing software, video editing software, anything, the things that you're going to use throughout the process of digitizing. And technology concerns will also include whatever tech solutions you'll need to host the materials and how people will access them. Are they going to be online? Will they only be accessible from a dedicated computer in your repository? Do you need to buy hard drives or cloud storage? How are you going to be storing this stuff? Are you going to be storing it locally in the cloud? Think about how you might want to do this. Maybe you're doing both. There's a framework for digital preservation called Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe. So it's called LOCKSS with 2 S's. And so there are institutions that participate in LOCKSS where geographically disparate institutions will host backups of each other's materials so that if one of them has a catastrophic data loss due to a natural disaster, their backups are somewhere else. So you don't necessarily have to be doing that, but think big when you're thinking about what could possibly happen that would mean that we would lose all of this stuff. Next slide, please. So money, the hardest thing to get to accomplish a project. So this is going to include payment for your workers, buying any equipment, buying software licenses, paying for a digital platform subscription. So if you're hosting everything online, you have an annual subscription, as well as storage costs and ongoing maintenance costs. And you can't talk about digitization without digital preservation. So there will always be ongoing maintenance costs. If a project is grant funded, the grant will probably only fund the digitization. It's harder to get sort of maintenance and operational costs covered by a grant. So what are you going to do about the maintenance and the continuity into the future? How are you going to work that into the workflow of your staff or your volunteers? And your financial resources, the money slide can also include assets like software that your institution already has. So maybe your project won't be quite as expensive because you already have an Adobe Creative Suite license at your institution, like if you're at a university. So when I worked at a university, we had Adobe, so I had access to Photoshop and Bridge and stuff. So I didn't have to work that into my project plan separately or account for it financially. Next slide, please. So some practical considerations to consider when you're picking out your equipment. What are the file outputs that your equipment can actually produce? I remember purchasing a document camera a few years ago. So it's kind of it's got a vertical piece and an arm, and the camera points down, so you could just put documents. I'm trying to mime this. You could put documents in front of it and quickly move them and shoot. So I needed to make sure that it would create TIFF files, not just JPEGs, because TIFFs are higher resolution images. Digital cameras will often produce proprietary format raw image files that need conversion to a preservation-friendly image format to people use without specialized software. So, you know, if, for example, if you are taking pictures with like a DSLR digital camera, and then you send those raw files to someone who doesn't have the specialized software because they don't have a Nikon or whatever, they might not be able to open those unless they've been converted to TIFF, JPEG, if PDF maybe. So you're going to need some sort of conversion software or process to get proprietary materials into a preservation-friendly file format. Also, make sure that you match your equipment to your desired outcomes, like file format, and also your existing technical infrastructure. So, you know, you might get a grant to buy a really cool scanner, but if your operating system is really old at your institution, then you might have difficulty using it. So like I ran into a problem where we had a really cool large format scanner, one of those ones where it's got like the little rollers in it and you put really large sheets of paper in it and it pulls it through and scans it. But as with successive versions of Windows, the drivers stop being compatible. So that piece of equipment eventually becomes obsolete. So, and think about, and it can go the other way too, where your operating system is old, you're not using the newest operating system of Windows or, you know, whatever the Mac operating system is called. So maybe your scanner can't, so maybe the operating system can't handle that piece of equipment. So make sure that there is a match. Look at the technical documentation for any equipment that you're going to buy. And I mentioned collaborations also, you know, maybe you're not acquiring this equipment, but there's someone in your community that has it, and you know, you can do favors for each other. And if you don't want to do this in-house, look for a vendor. I've taking a bunch of video stuff this year, a bunch of audio stuff next year, up to someone who has all of the equipment for all these different media types. So you don't necessarily have to build a digitization lab in your institution if you just don't have those resources. Now, I've mostly been talking about projects with the assumption that public access is the goal, but you also might be digitizing museum objects for a curatorial or a registration database or institutional documents as part of records management. So depending on the scenario, you'll have to think about how those users can access those materials on their own devices if it's not just out on the open web. So the types of platforms you might be looking at for hosting those materials might be a little different. Next slide, please. So these are really basic technical requirements for when you're digitizing images, audio, video. Oh, I just realized that I have a typo. I have audio twice. The last row should say text. So for images, the best file format is a TIFF. That's because it is it's widely used, its code is documented, so it's not just tied to one type of software. Scanning at 300 to 600 DPI is the preservation standard. If you're scanning negatives or slides, you're going to go bigger because they're so little and you want to blow them up. And then the bit rate. So the bit rate is like how much information is included in each bit in each like second of media, or each like it's hard for me to describe, but if you have an option to set that minimum 16-bit. With audio, you're going to use WAV files. Resolution isn't a thing. 24-bit rate. Video, QuickTime, Anyway, you can read it. So for text, a PDF-A is actually the best text format. Still scan at 300 DPI, so you can get really good definition on your text. But a PDF-A is the archival PDF standard. So PDF is where you use like Adobe Reader or Adobe Acrobat to open. They used to not be editable, but now you can do a ton of stuff with Adobe. So even though Adobe is a private company, the PDF-A is an open format, meaning that the company has released the code for the PDF-A into the wild. It's open source. So even if Adobe goes under, anybody can look at that code and build a program that can read a PDF-A. So, and there are lots of different open formats. So something like docx, a Microsoft Word document is it's widely used enough, and enough people have Microsoft Office that most people won't have a problem opening it. But if someone doesn't have Microsoft Office, then they can't open that. So that's why a PDF-A is more preservation friendly. And as times change and companies go under, some of this guidance can change. Technology is changing all the time. But for right now, these are just some general guidelines. And some of these things you might never even think about, like the bitrate or the resolution of video. But it's important to just have high quality digital objects so that they're reproducible, so that people can see details. And so they'll actually be useful into the future. Next slide, please. Oh, and actually one other thing I was going to say, when you're digitizing files, keep your master files separate, and you might have dissemination copies that are lower resolution, that are JPEGs, that are less preservation friendly files, that's what you send to people because they're smaller. A TIFF can be like 35 megabytes. So maybe you keep those master files in one location, and if someone asks for a copy, you send them a JPEG, or the JPEG is what you host online. But the original master file that you digitize is going to be that high resolution. Sorry. So make sure that when you're doing any project, that you document what it is that you're doing, so that people in the future understand how these materials were made, and also so that your project is reproducible with other materials. So, and also keep track of what you actually digitize. I ran some projects where it was really hard to tell what parts of a collection had been scanned by previous employees without going through and looking at each photograph and matching it to like a bunch of digital images that I was looking at on a screen. So I started filling out a form to place with the physical objects, and then keep a corresponding spreadsheet in my digital files that kept track of what materials in a folder had been scanned, and if any of them weren't scanned, where the digital files were saved, their naming convention, if there was any descriptive metadata, if they were online. And that really helped. I mean, it set content standards and naming conventions. So like if you have your file name be descriptive in some way, in that it is like including a collection name, maybe a box folder number, or maybe a photo number that's also on the physical object, so that someone can look at that digital object and find the physical object, and vice versa. And be consistent throughout the collection, so that everything just lines up. When you look at a list of all the files for a project, it all lines up, and everything's numbered and in the same order corresponding with the physical collection, if you can. Next slide, please. So in your documentation, oh, actually back one, yes. So record not only what metadata to use when you're writing your descriptive metadata, but how to apply each field, and maintain the technical documentation for all of your equipment and your digital platforms. So all of your scanner manuals, any guides to, say, if you're using, I don't know, JSTOR Forum is something I've used a lot. All your manuals for using JSTOR Forum, or whatever, Content DM, whatever software you're using. Keep all of that stuff, keep it all in one place. Refer to it often. Maybe keep annotations that have been helpful to you. and have an in-house user guide for how you are using those tools. So, write out the instructions, the manuals. It will make it so much easier to bring in collaborators and start these projects over again in the future, where maybe you're only doing one project a year. It takes you 6 weeks out of the year, and then you're waiting for another grant cycle, and you're not going to get back to using a lot of this stuff for a while. So you want to be able to just dive right back in and know your process without having to reinvent the wheel. Next slide, please. So when you are describing your content, match whatever metadata standard you're using to the content. Like Dublin Core is really general and easy to use. You can describe anything with Dublin Core. You can describe a chair, you can describe a book, you can describe a manuscript, a photograph. But there are a lot more specific standards. So like if you have a natural history collection, maybe you want to use something like Darwin Core, which is based on Dublin Core, but there are a lot more specific fields that are geared towards natural history. Or if you have visual materials, maybe you want to use VRA Core, again, based on Dublin Core, but with a lot more specific fields for visual resources, art, architecture, things like that. And consider your potential audiences and their relationships to the material when you describe them. So if you have an expert audience, this is highly technical, highly scientific material, if it's like architectural drawings or let's see, the papers of a physicist, maybe. You're going to have a really highly qualified, like an expert audience. So yeah, then in those cases, go for however complex metadata you feel is necessary. But if you are describing for a general audience, then maybe you don't need to do that, and you stick with your basic 15 Dublin Core fields. If you're digitizing for public access, say just your archives, if you're digitizing for museum registration or for internal records management, those are vastly different projects once you get past the scanning. So the choices you make about metadata will vary depending on the expertise of the audience and the specificity of the knowledge they have about your materials. If these are all internal records, you might not be using the same, you might be designing your own metadata standard for your internal records management system. So next slide, please. So consider whether you ought to create technical metadata as well. These are schemas like METs and MODs, which keep track of the information related to the creation of the digital object. So not just, the digital object as a representation of a physical thing, but as created at this date with the technical metadata would include things like this is the resolution, the frame rate, all of those things. This is the type of software it was created on. So you can do some of that with software like Adobe Bridge. And then there are also archival standards like METs and MODs, which I'm not super familiar with, but if you are going to be doing a big, very technical metadata project, maybe if you're working at a university and you have the resources to be creating that sort of information, then you might be doing that. And whenever possible in your descriptive metadata, use controlled vocabularies to improve discoverability. So it's frustrating for users to try to find similar materials when they're all described a little bit differently, like multiple names used to describe the same person. So use a controlled vocabulary like the Library of Congress subject headings or the Library of Congress name authority file, the art and architecture thesaurus, or very specific controlled vocabularies related to the domain of the materials. And you can also develop internal controlled vocabularies to describe things like buildings on your campus. Make sure that it's always referred to the same way and not by a building nickname, something like that. So you can always develop your own controlled vocabularies for things very specific to you, but also look to national or international standards to make sure that you're being consistent in the way that you describe your materials. And just a small plug, I am going to be doing a webinar coming up next month on controlled vocabularies. So maybe attend that. Next slide, please. So when you're deciding what you're going to actually do with this stuff, where you're going to put it, what kind of platform it's going to be on. Find out if your institution has access to digital content platforms already, particularly if you're a university that uses a particular cataloging platform for books in your library. You may be able to add on a program like Content DM through OCLC or JSTOR Forum if you're a JSTOR subscriber. But you might also choose a website like Flickr Commons to post materials for free, or you could choose a free or paid package through Omeka. If you're part of a museum, you might also be digitizing materials just for your museum database that you already have, either for internal records or for public access. That's actually something that my institution is working on right now. We have an internal database for all of our collections items, but that's not accessible to the public. And so we have projects to photograph all of the, it's a really big museum, to photograph all the objects, have up-to-date images, and then we will be able to actually publish those records so that people can view them online. Next slide, please. So you might be able to contribute to, back one. Yeah, there are 3 slides for platform choice because there are a lot of things to consider. You might be able to contribute to a collaborative platform. And if you are doing so, or if you're getting started building a collaborative, think about how you're going to build it, especially if it's grant funded, because paying for the hosting and maintenance may be more sustainable in the long run than trying to do all that work in-house with free or open source software. So anecdotally, I'm working with some colleagues right now on deciding what to do with a collaborative platform that was designed and built with grant money. A bunch of institutions all contributing digitized content to this one platform. And it was built with open source software. It's on a server that we theoretically control. But there's no one on staff at any particular institution who can do all the back-end maintenance. The platform's slowing down, the software, it's free, but it needs to be updated and no one can do that. So we can't accomplish this on our own. And we've also all got our own jobs. So we're considering whether to migrate to a hosted service where all of that backend stuff is maintained by a third party. So, but if you have, as one of your resources, people on staff who can program and maintain servers and do a local instance of Omeka or DSpace or some other repository, then that is an asset and you can go in that direction. But don't always assume that you have to do it all yourself if you have the resources to have that maintained as part of an annual contract by another company. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to specifically endorse or discourage use of any particular platform. I've mentioned a whole bunch because, excuse me, every project and every institution has individual needs to meet and outcomes that they want to accomplish. But when you're choosing a platform, compare the levels of service at the different attributes or features available, like the number of users, the types of metadata supported, or the types of file formats supported, the ease of searching for end users, all things like that. Really look at it, do a big comparison of everything you're considering. Talk to institutions that are similar to yours or that have done similar projects, see what they're using, and how they found it, how their users have found it. Because each service provides different things, and there are pros and cons to every single platform. And some of them will fit your needs better than others. Next slide, please. I love this image it's from a set of images to illustrate digital preservation concepts, because it looks like it's I guess we're protecting an AutoCAD drawing of a teapot. I just love that. I don't know. So there's no digitization without digital preservation, as I've said. It's not one and done. And digital materials are even more fragile than physical ones. They're vulnerable to all sorts of things like media obsolescence, the decay of the data on the disk, or bit rot, accidental or intentional tampering, or deletion, hardware failure, and a host of other threats. We talk sometimes in archives about benign neglect. If you've got a bunch of papers that are just sitting in a room, as long as the room isn't like actively growing mold or on fire, they might be okay for 100 years. But with digital materials, there is no benign neglect. That stuff is going to break down, whether it's the physical hardware, the loss of the software. Maybe you can physically like turn the disk on, but you can't access the materials. So managing the life cycle of digital assets will keep the materials usable into the future. So you're not wasting effort or having to redo the project. You should schedule digital maintenance, backups, and migration of data formats if necessary, and this can be scalable. This one slide could be an entire webinar series. So I'm just touching on it here, that digital preservation needs to be part of your project plan. And if you can't do the highly technical tasks like verifying checksums, which makes sure that a file has not undergone any changes at the bit level, at least perform your backups and at least keep track of disk storage. Like these files are stored on this hard drive or this folder. There's no absolute safety and absolute security in cybersecurity and digital preservation, but there's a lot that we can do to minimize risk. When you choose a platform, it's important to consider how easy it will be to get your stuff out of it if you ever need to do so. Maybe the platform business fails, or it stops meeting your needs, or another reason, or like you can't afford it anymore. Find out about the cybersecurity of the platform that you're using. And make sure that you're storing data in places with security that's commensurate to its sensitivity. So this is more relevant for like internal records management. Think about the cybersecurity for things like internal personnel records or the governance of your institution, meeting minutes, things like that. That's very different than digitizing photographs from the Civil War. And the security that you're going to need really depends on the sensitivity of that data. You may have heard it in the news lately that there have been cybersecurity attacks on some major museums over the past couple of months. Those attacks targeted more like donor records and financial information. So not so much trying to take down collections, but they ended up impacting the full information systems of the victim institutions. So, that's not something to lose sleep over necessarily, but something to keep in mind when you're thinking about the sensitivity of your data. Are you keeping donor information in a system with your collections information? How well is it backed up? What would happen if you lost access to it? If you have any IT support at your organization, consult with them about your digitization project, even if they're not involved with it. You know, you're not necessarily putting more work on their plate, but chat with them and find out what their concerns are. If they know of any software changes coming at your institution that might impact your project, or they might just give you some ideas, and you'll have a better connection, a better understanding of the IT landscape at your institution. They'll have a better understanding of your archives or museum objects, and you'll be able to support each other better. Next slide, please. So if I were to summarize, which I am, I think we could break down all of this stuff that I have said and rambled through into 5 things. If you're planning a digitization project and you want to make it sustainable into the future, plan before you scan, describe, provide, so that's providing access to your users, and preserve. Those are the 5 steps. And there are going to be questions and considerations for each. But everything can really be broken down into those 5 things, I think. So that is everything that I have said. I have no idea how much time I've taken up. I did see some hands go up. So I guess we can take questions. And I know Emma will have some stuff to talk about at the end as well.
Let's just go over the next webinars and then we'll take questions. Okay. So again, Backlog put on this webinar. Backlog is my company. We do archival consulting and genealogy research. And like Jenna said, our next webinar is on controlled vocabularies. So if you're really interested in like, what is Dublin Core? What is Darwin Core? Where are they used? We actually did a webinar last March on Dublin Core. And that's on our YouTube channel if you're interested. But if you just kind of want an overview of all of these different types of controlled vocabularies and when they should be used.
Yeah, so and actually like the controlled vocabularies will interact with Dublin Core. It's what you put into those fields. Dublin Core is the field, the controlled vocabularies are the terms that you're going to be putting into them.
So that's next, that's about 3 or 4 weeks from today.
Mhm.
And then right after that, we did a webinar last week on web archives, like kind of what are they, where do they live? Our next one's on how to actually web archive. So, all the websites that are out there, how are they being saved? And that's a how to. And then in March, we're going to do, Jen is back to do on EAD, encoded archival description. So if you've encountered that in grad school or looking to like work it into your archival preservation workflow, just come and learn some basics. And if you want to check out, and if you want to register for any of those, our URL is backlog-archivist.com/webinars. And on that page, there's a description of each webinar and then a link to register. So it works just like this one. And if you're interested in that Dublin Core webinar, any other webinars that we've done, this is our YouTube channel. Go ahead and check it out. And now finally, is it Celio? Sorry, I think I butchered your name.
Yes, but it's okay. It's Celio.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. This was a fantastic webinar. Thank you so much for
Oh, thank you.
putting it together. It was very, very informative. And I tend to work with material that is from different cultures and languages. And one of the biggest challenges is using controlled vocabularies that include both languages.
Mhm.
And I'm in Canada, we use a lot of French and English, but I've also worked with Japanese stuff or Spanish language stuff. And yeah, it's a nightmare trying to um, integrate more than one language.
Yeah,
Have
and
you come across?
yeah, you can always borrow terms from multiple controlled vocabularies. Like sometimes if you
Mhm,
look up a book in WorldCat, it will have subject headings that are in many different languages.
mhm,
And the art and architecture thesaurus also is in multiple languages. So if you're looking for the term for like a specific type of photo process, it has not
mhm,
just English, but a bunch of different terms. And sometimes there isn't, there might not be a translation or a controlled vocabulary that quite fits.
mhm.
And I think that's always a good opportunity to either create one or just as long as you're being consistent with the terms that you use, like these two things we are describing, you're going to use the same term in the same way. Um, but you can combine your controlled vocabularies.
Okay.
It's sorry, it's a standard set of terms so that when people are searching across different institutions, they know that similar materials are described in the same way. So you might need to pull from a couple different things. And also, depending on what your metadata schema is, if you might, um, so sorry, there's going to be a lot of sentence fragments here. So there are a lot of different types of descriptive terms that you might be using. So like there are topic terms, that's more about the subject term, and like sorry, these are things that you know, but like your topic terms and your genre terms and your geographical terms might all come from different controlled vocabularies. Or you might be combining them because
And a lot of, especially with geographic terms, a lot of them have changed the spelling. Mumbai,
yeah.
Bombay, right?
Mhm.
And so on, which has always been challenging because you end up sometimes pulling from more than two or three or
Yeah.
four or five places, even with some languages, materials before World War II were
Mhm.
spelled differently in their native languages,
Yeah.
and then changed after that, or the reading order of a language. There's a lot of things out there that can make one's head explode.
Yeah. And sometimes reparative or just updating description, it becomes necessary. And controlled vocabularies usually aren't static. So as they update, they might add new terms, revise terms. And so that will necessitate doing some redescription work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got a pretty good setup there with your mic. Pat, I think you had a question next.
Yes, hi. Um, Very good presentation. I appreciated
Yep.
it. Um, I'm at a historical society for a town in New Jersey, Matawan, and so far what we've done is we've used Google Drive And
Mhm.
so now we have the capability to browse by topic, but also to search the system using Google's technology, because it
Mhm.
goes through and it looks for words and so forth. I'm wondering if we go online with a lot of our content using whatever resources, we'd be able to put it up online with whatever software. What are the capabilities for searching through the database? I like the serendipitous aspect of being able to search for keywords that we didn't necessarily think of.
Mhm. It really depends. Some platforms will support full text searching, and some won't, and so you'll have to do additional descriptive work. But it really depends on the format the materials are in and if that particular platform allows for full text searching. So it's, I mean, and there are so many different ones out there. The answer, it depends, is always the answer with archival materials. But that's the sort of thing where before you choose a platform, make sure that it does the things that you want it to do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian, you've got a question?
Yes, please. A couple of questions. I'm a volunteer at the Patuxent Patuxent River Naval Air Museum, which is quite a niche museum. We have thousands of hours of video, 16mm film in 10 different sets of formats. What is I know you said, but I missed the point. What was your preferred method for storing these? MP4, MOV, or whatever. I'm using
Oh yeah,
MP.
so you might have your masters, which are obviously going to be huge files for video. Using the QuickTime, it's like I can't remember like the dot whatever, but it's like an MPEG QuickTime format. But then you might have MP4 as your access version. Like that's what you post online. That's what you send to people. But it's the QuickTime, and I'm trying to think of what the actual I'm sorry, I'm having a complete brain meltdown here.
MPEG 2, I think.
Yeah, that okay. Yeah, I was like, I couldn't get the letters in the right order. So, but also, if you are only able to create the access version like an MP4, like that's still okay. It's not like as ideal, but something is always better than nothing, I guess. And using a more broadly available format is always better than using something that's a bit more niche and a bit rarer. Because most computers can open an MP4, for example. But also the Library of Congress maintains standards on digitization and recommended file formats. If you just Google Library of Congress digitization standards, that will come up. So that'll have a lot more guidance than I've provided in this short presentation. But I would definitely check that out.
Okay, thank you. And one other one. Do you actually have like a question and answer where I could write to you for further information or advice?
Why don't you shoot me an email? And my email address is on the screen right now. And we can field more questions that way.
Okay, thank you. Except your email hasn't come through. It's not on my screen.
Oh, okay. So it's on the it's my name. It's Emma at backlog-archivist.com. When I chose the URL, I didn't take into consideration how hard it would be to like say that over the phone. So as long as you spell archivist right, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you for your time. A very good presentation. Greatly appreciated.
Thanks. I think Helena's next.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
Really great presentation this afternoon, and it was an awful lot to take in, and I would like to watch the presentation again. How do we get the link for the recorded session today?
Yeah, so if you go ahead and search for Backlog Archivist on YouTube, and if you subscribe to our channel, you will get an alert. on when we post it. I will also email out the link to everybody who registered today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so just check your email. All right, and then Micah was next.
Yes, Jenna, I'm at a museum institution and we have a large backlog of VHS media, which we are in the process of digitizing. Can you speak a little bit to, this may be a bit sacrilegious and you can tell me why you recommend not to do it, but our thinking was that once we've digitized the old media types as they are outdated, we would store them in multiple locations, including a cloud, a hard drive, and on DVD, and then destroy the original media type. Would you recommend doing that? If not, why would you keep the original VHS?
So are all of these materials to which you own the copyright, or are some of them like almost like library materials?
Sure. So the VHS that we're currently doing are our institutional archive. So they are things that we own the copyright to. They are videos taken in-house. However, we also have a large VHS collection of global media that was provided to us from many sources over the years that would be different, that we'll be doing next.
So I weirdly the copyright guidance for migrating formats for a library is if you're digitizing it into or putting something into a new format, you have to keep the original. I do not know why. So like at the university library where I used to work, there were some materials where instead of like buying the DVD when it came out, we could just digitize the VHS and have a DVD for people to check out, but we had to keep the VHS. I don't know why. For archival materials, it's different. And if it weren't VHS, I would say always keep the originals. Like I always recommend keeping the originals because digital materials can also break down. With VHS, it's tricky because VHS are actively deteriorating.
Right. Plus the the shelf space that it takes up.
Right. So I mean, it's one of those things where I want to say still keep them in, cold storage if you can, and hope that you never need to access them again. But I also recognize that that's not super realistic at all institutions. So it's sort of like this is not legal advice.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
We don't have cold storage, unfortunately, but that is helpful to know, particularly about the copyrighted material.
Yeah,
So-
still, yeah. So, I mean, really try to maintain what you can, or if you if you happen to have multiple copies, like keep one.
Hmm.
It's usually like maintaining the original is like you go back to that if you ever need to redigitize it or like when things are remastered.
Right.
But with VHS that probably like won't be possible, but also who knows how the technology might change. I don't know, maybe. And I don't know, like, oh God, I hate to even mention this, but like maybe with AI will be able to restore the data somehow and fill in what's been faded. I don't know. I don't think tech is going to save us, but you can always throw something away later, but you can never get it back if you've thrown it away.
Right, exactly. No, I appreciate that. Thank you for answering that. It's a bit of a quandary, I understand, but I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't be asking if it were anything else but VHS.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Are there any other questions? If you don't know how to raise your hand, feel free to just unmute. Oh, we've got another one. Rhonda? Oh, Rhonda, if you want to go ahead and unmute, you've got your hand up. Might be an accident.
Oh, it wouldn't let me unmute. I'm so sorry. Okay, I just kept clicking it and nothing was happening. I just wanted to say two things. I wanted to ask a question, but also say to Micah, one good reason to keep the VHS is you might go, it might be years before you actually access the new digital copy that you made and find out that it wasn't done properly. And then if you've already thrown out the VHS, then you won't have any copies of it. So that's just another
Yeah, what
thing.
was your question?
So my question has to do with the Dublin core and
Mhm.
all those other ones. How do you find out what all the different metadata systems are that might
Yeah,
be
there are-
available?
I don't know if there is a grand unified list anywhere. There probably is. I think like in the UK they actually maintain like a list of, or like a wiki almost, of metadata standards, which I do not know off the top of my head. But the Library of Congress has a lot of information about different standards. If you have materials that are really specific to a particular domain, like I don't like physics or something, the professional organizations for those that are like related to those materials might have some advice, or archivists with similar types of materials. But if you're not working with really specialized materials, especially like, I'm thinking like in the sciences, like there are specific like medical metadata schemas, things like that. Then something like Dublin Core is perfectly serviceable, and it can do a lot. So there's, if you're not dealing with really specific materials, don't worry about finding like the perfect thing that's like most specific. Like if I mean, I don't think there probably isn't like a metadata schema that's like for Victorian, describing Victorian materials from New England, for example. Like that describes a lot of what's at my institution. There probably isn't that. And we don't need, and like we don't need that. But if I had like scientific materials or like not medical records, but like medical research, then that'll be useful to have a lot more fields that are specifically tailored to that stuff. But I'm wandering. Library of Congress is a good place to look. Society of American Archivists, a good place to look. And just the communities around similar types of materials.
Do we have any other questions on digitization? All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap here. We did about 10 minutes of question and answer. So again, I will email out the recording. But thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.